Welcome back into Cougar Sports Saturday. Mitch Harper and Nate Slack with you. We're counting down for BYU versus West Virginia. About a little over an hour and a half away until tip-off between the Cougars and Mountaineers in Morgantown, Hope Coliseum. BYU is 3-0 against West Virginia, looking to maintain that perfect record. It's been strange, the Big 12 scheduling. You would think that BYU wouldn't go to Morgantown every single year, but that's what's happened so far since BYU joined the league. This is their third consecutive year in Morgantown, and there have been some big wins in Morgantown. I remember last year, BYU lost to Cincinnati, and then they go to Morgantown. It was the day that Tom Holmoe announced that he was retiring, and BYU got a breakthrough win, and they won out the rest of the regular season. Maybe this can be another turning point game for BYU in its season, because despite that poor performance earlier in the week, we know that this BYU team is capable, and especially when you've got a player like A.J. DeBonsa, who on any given night, Nate, can put together a 40-point night. Heck, I mean, this guy could take over a game on his own. So that gives you the hope that BYU can win any contest.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was kind of the narrative heading into the season is even if BYU only had A.J. DeBonsa, there's no reason to think that BYU couldn't make a Sweet 16 run. So it's easy for fans to get caught up in the recent losses, and that's been frustrating in itself. But I still think the ceiling's high for this basketball team. It's just the consistency you want to see. And so I think that consistency has to start today with a tough road game, it sounds like, with that West Virginia insider that we just played, that conversation you had with him earlier this week, where it sounds like it's probably going to be a sellout. They're striping the stadium. It's going to be a tough environment. And last year, BYU ended up pulling it out late, some late game heroics by Mihailo Boskovic. I think that the crowd is going to be pretty juiced, and they're excited to also see A.J. DeBonsa in the stadium. So it's going to be a tough game for BYU, but it should be one that BYU should be able to win.
And I think you bring up a good point there. And that's been different this season compared to BYU's first 2 years in the Big 12. Every year, or every game that BYU has gone on the road, it's been energized road crowds. I don't think BYU's responded well to that. I think AJ's star power creates environments where these fans want to see AJ, because when you hear nonstop, this could be the next number one overall draft pick, that naturally creates people wanting to go to that game and see the next big thing. So 10 years from now, they can say, I saw that guy in college. So BYU has been kind of a must-see event for a lot of these road, venues that BYU's been traveling to in the Big 12. The first 2 years in the Big 12, BYU would go to some of these gyms, and West Virginia faithful, for example, they'd probably look around and go, remind me again while we're playing BYU? This is weird. Now it's starting to feel a little bit natural. You're starting to build a little bit of history. You're starting to build some experiences between these fan bases, and then you add on top of the fact that AJ and Rob Wright are some pretty big stars. People want to knock those guys off, and BYU still got a top 25 ranking next to their name. I don't expect, if they even win today, that would continue considering the way that they played on Tuesday. But the positive to that UCF game, Nate, was that it was so late that hopefully none of the pollsters even looked at it. They just looked at the box score and said, 13-point loss. It happens. It's an off night. Maybe they look at that and they still, if they win today, stay in the top 25. It's not necessary in terms of bracketology, but you want to stay in that top 25.
Yeah, you want to stay in the top 25 just because it keeps you in the national conversation, but luckily for basketball, it doesn't have the same impact it does for football. To your point about BYU being kind of a sought-after opponent for opposing fans this season, that's exactly what we talked about in 2023 when Texas and Oklahoma were on the way out.
Yeah.
It was the question of who's going to be taking their spots. And with football the way that it's trending up and looking like this year, there's no reason that football shouldn't make the Big 12 championship game again. And so you got to think that, especially with the fact that BYU has 7 home games. Like, we haven't talked about that a ton. There's only 5 road games for BYU. One is at Utah. One is at Colorado State. And so really only three road games where you're having to travel by plane and really get out outside of the Mountain Time Zone. But it's cool to see BYU in this position where they're in a spot where they could kind of become the face of the Big 12 Conference, and I think we're seeing that with these opposing fan bases selling out stadiums for basketball and football.
I think it has blown away people that BYU's athletic department has been as good as they've been in the revenue-generating sports in football and basketball. There was that dip year in year one with football. Basketball's been pretty steady throughout. I mean, this is going to be the third straight year out of 3 where they're going to the NCAA tournament. And any notion from Cougar fans saying, if you lose out, you're not going to the dance, stop that right now. BYU's going dancing. It's just a matter of how do they finish and what does their seed lead to, because that does add the significance here with this game. Even though West Virginia is not the greatest of teams, they're on a 3-game skid, 16-13 overall. The beauty of the Big 12, it's a quad 1 opportunity, and BYU could add that to the resume. But if you do lose out, we were talking about it in the break, Nate. I mean, it could be a situation where you start to slip to the 7 or the 8 and the 9 seed even, and we know we've heard it many years with BYU and the committee. Well, Sunday play plays a role, and that maybe costs them a seed line. So, they got to take care of business, and I'm really intrigued to see that response from this team. And I don't doubt AJ's going to respond. I think AJ's going to get his, and he's going to step up. He's going to perform. Some of the other guys, how do they perform while facing adversity? Because that performance on Tuesday was just an absolute no-show. To the likes of which, I mean, I've watched many BYU basketball games in that Marriott Center, and I always like BYU's chances at home, and I don't often see BYU get down by 36 points against anyone. There's been some really good teams that have rolled through there, but, I mean, that gave me flashbacks to, honestly, the 1-25 season. And I know that's crazy to say because this is one of the most talented rosters that I've seen BYU assemble. Just the effort wasn't there. So the response, the fight, I think is going to be a big thing because they are going into a crowd that senses they know if they can get on a hot streak, West Virginia, they're going to be back in the NCAA tournament conversation. That's the great thing about the Big 12. Every game takes on huge high stakes.
Absolutely. Yesterday when Bruce Mitchell was talking about Keanu Tanavasa and some of the strides that he feels that Keanu's made, he said that Keanu Tanavasa's been playing more sassy. And that's what I want to see from this basketball team, Mitch. It feels like their swagger's kind of dipped. I want to see them get back to that confident, swaggy BYU basketball team that's taking down Clemson in Madison Square Garden.
Let's get to the three-pointer. We'll break down an in-depth preview of this matchup, BYU and West Virginia, and around the corner, too. We'll give you our score predictions as we continue to count down to tip-off. We're about 30 minutes away from tossing it over to Greg Wrubell and the crew for coverage from Morgantown, and then tip-off, counting it down about an hour and a half away, 3:30 p.m. between BYU and West Virginia right here on KSL.